Imagine a knock at your door, not soldiers, not taxmen exactly, just a few serious-looking officials with a clerk, and the clerk is holding parchment. And they start asking questions. How much land do you hold? How many oxen? How many people work here? How many pigs? And then the odd one, who held this land before you? And they write down every single answer. Then they thank you, get back on their horses and ride to the next farm to do it all again. That happened right across England in the year 1086. And the ordinary people watching it happen were unsettled by it in a way that is hard to describe. One Englishman wrote at the time that it was shameful, that the king had it searched out so closely that not one pig, not one cow was left out of the record. You can hear it in his words. It felt like being stripped bare, like being seen too clearly by someone who had just conquered you. They gave the record a nickname, not the official name. The official name was dull. They called it the Domesday Book, as in Doomsday, the Day of Judgment, because once your name and your land were written in that book, the decision was final, no appeal, just like the last day, when the book of your life gets opened and there is nothing left to argue. That book still exists. It is sitting in a building in London right now, and it contains the oldest written record of English families that we have. The first time most of the people on this island ever had their names set down on a page that survived. So the obvious question is, whose names? And is there any chance one of them connects to you? The answer surprised me when I really dug into it. And I think it will surprise you too, because what most people believe about this book is wrong, and the truth is far better than the myth. So stick with me to the end, because there is one thing about your own surname I want you to understand, and it changes how you see all of this. Quick thing before we go further, if you like this, the actual story under the surface, the stuff that never made it into your school lessons, subscribe to British Bloodlines. Digging up who your ancestors really were is the entire point of this channel, and there is a lot more buried where this came from. It is free, and you will not miss the next one. Okay, back to the book. Now, the first thing I have to clear up is the biggest myth of all. People imagine the Domesday Book as a giant list of everyone who lived in England, like a medieval phone directory. It is not even close. It is a record of land, who owned what. And that one fact changes everything, because it means the names written in that book are almost all the names of landowners, the people at the top. If you held an estate, you are in there. If you were one of the ordinary people who actually worked that estate, and that was nearly everyone alive, you do not get a name. You get counted like cattle. 12 villages here, 8 smallholders there. Real people, thousands and thousands of them, with lives and families and names their neighbours knew. And the book reduces them to a number in the margin. Their names are just gone. Forever. So when we talk about the names in the Domesday Book, we are not talking about a whole nation. We are talking about the small, ruling layer sitting on top of it. Out of the hundreds of thousands of households the survey counted, only around 1,800 different names actually appear. That is, who is in the book, the owners, not the owned. And here is where it gets dramatic, because the book does not just tell you who owned England in 1086. It quietly tells you who owned it before and lets you watch them get erased. 20 years before this, England belonged to the English. Thousands of Anglo-Saxon landowners, from great lords down to minor local men. Then, in 1066, William came across the Channel, won at Hastings, and took the crown by force. And The Domesday Book is the receipt for what happened next, because when you look at who held the land before the conquest and who held it after, you see the same thing on page after page after page. The English name is crossed out, a Norman name sits in its place. Let me give you the scale of it because it is genuinely shocking. Before the conquest, several thousand English lords held the land. 20 years later, when a historian sat down and counted how many of the old English families still held estates big enough to call themselves real barons, the answer was 2. 2 men out of an entire aristocracy. Almost everyone else had been wiped out and replaced. This is why some historians call the Domesday Book the obituary of Anglo-Saxon England. It is not a list of families, it is the paper trail of a ruling class being destroyed and a new one moving into its house. And the new owners were a tight little circle, William's relatives and the men who had fought for him. The greediest of the lot was his own half-brother, a man called Odo. He was technically a bishop, but he fought in battle in armour, and he grabbed land like his life depended on it. He turns up connected to more than 500 places in the book. 500. He became, after the king himself, the richest man in the entire country, a churchman who was eventually thrown into prison by his own brother the king for being too powerful and too grasping. That is the kind of man whose name fills these pages, not saints, winners. Alongside him a handful of others carved up the rest. Another of William's half-brothers took the whole southwest. A Breton lord called Alan the Red ended up named in over 1,000 entries, holding a huge chunk of Yorkshire. Just 11 of these top families ended up holding nearly half of all the land in England that did not belong to the king or the church. That is how it worked. A whole country funneled into a few dozen hands. Now, here is the part I really want you to hear, the part that made me want to make this whole video. You have probably heard someone say it. Maybe you have said it yourself. My surname is in the Domesday Book. My family goes back to 1086, and I get why people love saying it. But I have to be straight with you, because the real story is actually more interesting than the myth. The names in the Domesday Book are almost all not surnames, not the way we mean it. In 1086, nearly everybody had just one name. What looks like a surname in the book is really just a little description bolted on to tell 2 men apart. And once you know how to read them, they crack open like a code. Some are places, when you see a Norman lord written down as D somewhere, de Warenne, de Mortimer, de Percy, that word D just means from. It is telling you the estate back in Normandy that he came from. It was not a family name he handed down to his children. It was just where he was from, like a label. But, and this is the real true connection, so do not lose it, those little from somewhere labels are exactly what later grew into some of the most famous surnames in Britain. Percy, Neville, Mandeville, Mortimer, Baskerville. Those names really do start here with these people in this book. That part is completely real. Others are even simpler. A man written down as the son of his father, or by his job, the steward, the crossbowman, and some, honestly, are just insults that a clerk wrote down word for word, exactly as people said them out loud. And these are my favourite thing in the entire book, because they prove these were real people with real reputations. There is a man in the Domesday Book officially recorded, and I am not inventing this, as Humphrey Golden Testicles. There is a fellow down as Paunch Face. There is an Englishman called Godwine Weak Feet, and best of all, one called Godwine Penny Father, which was the medieval way of saying tightwad. Think about that. 1,000 years ago, a man was such a legendary cheapskate that being stingy literally became his name and then got written into the official record of the entire kingdom, where it has sat for 1,000 years. That is not a statistic. That is a person you would recognize. So here is the honest truth about your surname and this book, and I want you to hold both halves of it at once. If your name is something like Percy or Neville, then yes, that name genuinely began in the world this book records. That is a real thread, and it is a good one. But sharing a name with a lord in Domesday does not mean you are descended from him. Lots of unrelated people picked up those same from somewhere names separately, and the trail between 1086 and the records that come later is broken and dark. Even the people who literally guard the original book will tell you it is usually the wrong place to look for your own ancestor. The name is real, the bloodline almost never is. Both of those are true, and the honest version holds them together. But the book gives you more than names and land. Every so often a whole human being climbs up out of the dry Latin and stands in front of you. There are women in this book, around 20 of them holding land straight from the king, most of them widows. And the greatest of them has a story you could not make up. Her name was Judith. She was William's own niece, married off to an English earl called Waltheof. When Waltheof got involved in a rebellion, it was Judith, his own wife, who informed on him to the king. Waltheof was executed. And there she is in the Domesday Book holding his lands across 10 counties, a woman who turned in her husband and collected his estates as the reward, written right there in the ledger. And there are gentler ones if you look. In Yorkshire, a woman named Asa, whose entry goes out of its way to say she held her land free from her husband's control even while they were married. And when they split up, she simply took her land and kept it in her own right as its lady. In Wiltshire, a widow named Leafgate, who held her land in exchange for doing gold embroidery for the king and queen. 1,000-year-old tax record, and it still somehow preserves a woman's independence and another woman's needle and thread. And then there is the darkest thing in the book. If you read through the pages for the north, for Yorkshire especially, you keep hitting the same short, flat word. Waste. It is waste. It is waste. Estate after estate that had been alive and valuable before the conquest, now just marked waste. That word is a scar. A few years after Hastings, the north of England rebelled, and William's response was to annihilate it. His men burned the villages, slaughtered the animals, and destroyed the food on purpose so that anyone who survived the fighting would face the winter with nothing. And 16 years later, when the officials rode through to count it all up, huge parts of the north were still empty, still ruined, still waste. I will be straight with you. Historians argue about exactly how many died, and some of the old numbers are probably too high, so I will not throw a figure at you and pretend it is certain. But nobody doubts it was a catastrophe. And the proof is sitting right there in the book. A whole region gone quiet, its devastation recorded one cold little word at a time. That is what the Domesday Book actually is, not a family tree you get to climb. It is a photograph, one incredibly detailed, ice-cold photograph of a conquered country, taken 20 years after the fall. It freezes a single moment, who lost everything, who took it, and what was left standing in the wreckage. The names in it are the winners and the losers of a takeover that remade this whole island. And the people underneath those names, the ones the book could not be bothered to name, just counted. Those are the silent millions that nearly all of us are actually far more likely to come from. Before I give you the last thought, do me one favor. If you have got this far and you are still with me, hit subscribe if you have not already. This is exactly the kind of thing we do here, week after week, taking the story you thought you knew and showing you what is really underneath it. And there is a whole buried country down here, and we are working through it. I would genuinely like you along for it. So here is where I will leave you. You now know what those names really are, where they came from, what they meant, and what they can and cannot tell you about you. So I want to hear yours. What is your surname? Does it have that Norman from somewhere shape, a Percy, a Neville, a Mandeville? Or is it one of the older, plainer English kinds? A trade, a place, your however many greats' grandfather's first name, the sort of name that belonged to the people underneath the lords, the ones this book only ever counted and never named? Put it in the comments and let us actually work out together which side of that book your name comes down on. I read every one of them. And I promise you, some of the names in those comments are going to be older than anyone expects, because that book was built to answer one question for one frightened king. Who holds England now? But the real question, the one it only mutters under its breath, is the one this entire channel exists to chase. Who were your people before they were the names we know them by? And that trail runs back a lot further than 1086. Stay close, we're only getting started.